Guys, welcome to the Chief Life Podcast. I'm Matthias Turner, and today I have Brenda Davis with us. Brenda, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Maddie. I'm really glad to be here.
So we actually got introduced through Dr. Joel Furman. He sent me onto you after we did our podcast. He was like, you know what? I think you guys get a lot out of interviewing Brenda Davis. She does nutrition work, and I think you'd love what she's actually got to say, which is really cool. So thank you for joining us.
Well, that was very kind of Joel. We're very much on the same page. So
okay, cool. So,
awesome.
I mean, I think what I'd love is for you to give a bit more of a background. But before we do, like you've been an author of many books. You're a registered dietitian. So some of your books include the Kick Diabetes Cookbook, Becoming a Vegan, both comprehensive and the express versions of that. You've got Becoming Raw, the Raw Food Revolution Diet, the new Becoming Vegetarian, Becoming Vegan, Defeating Diabetes, and Dairy Free and Delicious. Holy hell, that's a lot of books.
I'm just in the midst of my 11th book right now, and I always thought I would do 12.
Okay.
Now I'm starting to think it may be 15. I'm not sure. I've still got a few good years in me.
Yeah, that's unreal. What kind of led you down, I guess, the route that you've taken so far? What kind of is your background and took you to where you are now?
Well, I've actually been a vegan for about 30 years or close to 30 years, mostly. I'd say 98% vegan.
Mm-hmm.
And what brought me down that path is really, it's a little bit of a strange story, but I was a public health dietitian, nutritionist, and I just started exploring where our food is actually coming from. And what triggered that interest in where our food was coming from was one of my best friends was out deer hunting. And I was trying to get him not to kill another deer. And what he said to me just really changed the course of my life. He said, just because you don't have the guts to pull the trigger does not mean you are not responsible for the trigger being pulled every time you buy a piece of meat camouflaged in cellophane in the grocery store. And then he said, at least the animals I eat have had a life. Mm. And it made me think, I need to be responsible for the food that I purchase. And so I just started to do some investigating. And what I found made me think, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want animals to have to go through pain, suffering, and death so I can eat them. Mm-hmm. When I don't have to. Not only do I not have to, I think in the long run, we may be better off not consuming those foods at all. And so I decided as a registered dietitian 30 years ago, I was a little bit of a pioneer because there weren't a whole heck of a lot of vegan dietitians. I didn't even know if there was a real live vegetarian dietitian on the planet at that time. I never even met a real live vegetarian. So it was a very, very new realm. And I had little kids. My kids are in their 30s now, but they were just little wee ones at that time. And so it was a little bit of a scary thought of going down that path. And my goal, when I decided to really make this my niche within my profession, was just to help people who are wanting to do the same to succeed brilliantly, not to experience the pitfalls that can go along with doing a kind of a diet that's different than the norm. So much of our nutrition education materials are geared towards omnivores. And so I felt we needed good educational materials that were geared towards people that wanted to be eating more plant-based. And so that was kind of the direction that I moved in with my career. And it's been so rewarding. Maddie, I think that we know that people can do well on a variety of different kinds of diets. Mm. And to me, the difference between choosing a completely plant-based diet and choosing one that has a little bit of animal product in it, like a lot of the people in the blue zones do. Are you familiar with the blue zones?
Yeah.
So these are the places in the world where people live the longest, healthiest lives, and they
find a lot of centurions, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they tend to eat they are all plant-based, but they do include a little bit of animal products, and they do very well. And so we know that people can do very well on different kinds of eating patterns. So for me, the reason to choose this path was for the animals and for the environment. And I think you can do it very well too for people.
Now, something that's come up a lot more recently, I would say, is the term plant-based. What is the difference between plant-based and a vegan diet, just for the listeners?
Yeah, so it is a fairly important distinction because plant-based could be a vegan diet or it could be a diet that's mostly plants. Mm-hmm. So a healthy diet with a lot of plants and a little bit of fish and eggs and maybe some cheese or dairy, but it's mostly plants. Mm-hmm. That could be a plant-based diet. Now there's another term that we hear quite commonly that is a whole food plant-based diet. Mm-hmm. And most people, when they use that term whole food plant-based, they're really talking about a vegan diet, but it doesn't necessarily mean it would be a vegan diet. Yes. Because plant-based just means mostly plants, whereas vegan means 100% plants. There are no animal products at all. No dairy, no eggs, no meat, no fish, no poultry. And so the distinction is you can eat a vegan diet that's a junk food vegan diet. Mm-hmm. Potato chips are entirely vegan. So, you could eat a really bad vegan diet. Yeah. And whereas a whole food plant-based, it's generally a healthy diet. So the way that I would label it is if you're talking about a plant-based vegan diet, I would just say 100% plant-based diet.
Yeah. I think in Australia, a lot of people actually claim to be plant-based, but they also, that's pretty much, they're saying they're vegan without the ethical backing. Like, it's not because necessarily they've chosen to go plant-based because of the animal rights. It's more so they've chosen to go plant-based because they want to do it for health reasons. So at least that's my experience from people that we've had come to us for diet stuff. Like, hey, we want to go plant-based and this is our reasons to it. And so, yeah, that's kind of been the understanding that we've had, but it's really cool to kind of hear it from your side as well.
Yeah, it is very common. I think most people probably come to it because of personal interest in health. And we tend as human beings to have these fairly small circles of compassion. We're interested in ourselves first, which makes a lot of sense, of course. Definitely. And as we widen, as we do that, often our circles of compassion start to expand, and we start to think about the impact that our food choices have on other people, like farmers, for example, in other countries, on other living beings like animals that are being used for food, and on the environment. And that's just kind of the bigger picture, really.
Yeah, and I think something that it was something that a friend actually said not so long ago was he was surprised by how much of a difference one person can actually make. Like, he kind of thought himself would not make a big difference if he chose to do these ethical differences and making a choice to help clean up the planet and helping to do things. And then when he actually started, he was blown away with how much he, as one person, could actually affect it. And so I think really, like, whatever your choices are, know that you can do better.
Yes, and that your choices affect everything and everyone around you. And with the way that social media is, and our impact is very far-reaching, or can be very far-reaching. One individual, I think one individual is almost always the start of a massive change for the world. Without one brave individual saying something that's a little bit different, probably change wouldn't happen much.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, plant-based or vegetarian or vegan diets, they're not necessarily just for someone who wants to be, lean and healthy. Like, I know people who are bodybuilders who are vegan and have been 100% vegan for a long time. Have you kind of worked with that realm of people as well, or is it purely health-based people you work with usually?
definitely both.
Yeah.
And I'm always very interested and encouraged to see a lot of the elite athletes who are vegan, because I think they basically silence the naysayers who say it can't be done. You need meat to get big muscles. You see some of the strongest people in the world that have adopted a plant-based diet, and I have a friend in Kelowna who is a mountain biker, and she does the races that are 6 or 7 days. And when she started racing, she was one of the almost very quickly one of the top 20 in the world in her sport. But she became vegan. I forget if it was about 4 years ago or so. She said within 6 months of becoming vegan, she became number one. She won the world championships. Huh. And she said she stayed there, in the top, the top most elite in the world ever since. And she said it improved her recovery, it improved her endurance. And so I wouldn't ever say that a person can't be, obviously, most of the elite athletes in the world are not vegan, but definitely a person can achieve incredible results on a vegan diet when they do it properly.
Yeah, and so I think like we kind of you brushed over it very quickly before about the vegans who are unhealthy in regards to their choices, maybe choosing to have potato chips because it's a completely vegan option. And I think there's a lot of options out there that are easy options to choose, like a lot of the packeted make do things, the make do protein options that they have. So for instance, the sausages and the meat patties, I should say. It's kind of like these quick options that have been made by other companies. It's pretty much a packeted option to try to make it a little bit easier. Is like, I mean, there definitely is good options there, but I guess what are the main foods that you see that are unfavorable that vegans tend to go towards?
Well, I think one of the biggest mistakes people make when they become vegan is they switch from a meat and potato diet to a pasta and bagel diet. They go from familiar foods, the meat and potato kind of meals, to other familiar foods. So instead of meat and potatoes, it's pizza, it's lasagna, it's vegan versions or vegetarian versions of familiar foods. And often these foods are concentrated in refined carbohydrates. And when you flip, animal products for refined carbohydrates, there's no win there. You're essentially incorporating more of something that doesn't promote and support health. And so that's a huge mistake. We need to be switching, if we're switching from meat and potatoes to beans and greens, we need to be switching to things that actually provide some real nutrition. And then the other things, talking about all of these very highly processed, convenient plant-based foods like the analogs and the cheeses and all of these things. I think these things can make being vegan so much easier. If you're going to a barbecue, you've got something to put on.
Yeah, definitely.
But I don't think that they necessarily should be part of the daily diet or to be staples. They should be the occasional treat. And also to recognize that within each category, there are broad differences in the quality of the product. So, for example, you can get a burger that's whole food based, black bean and red peppers and cashews and that kind of a burger, which is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Or get a burger that's made with genetically modified soy that's been extracted using hexane, that, all of that's just a less desirable choice. Now, you can get a soy-based patty that's, organic, and they're really trying to make it with reasonable ingredients, and that can be something that could be incorporated on occasion as well. But generally, I think also cheeses. Some cheeses are made with hydrogenated oils, whereas other cheeses are made with cashews or macadamia nuts or something like that, and they're fermented. using probiotics, and so they're highly nutritious foods, whereas the hydrogenated, fake cheese product is way worse than the cheese, than the cheese you're trying to replace. So
Yeah.
I think that we just have to be selective.
And how about when it comes to proteins? Like, I mean, a lot of, sometimes depending on the person's gut, if they've got leaky gut syndrome or something like that, or something along the lines, things like lentils can occasionally kind of upset the stomach, as well as something like, for instance, corn. Do you ever, like, what do you find around the protein sources? What do you find is best for people compared to, I guess, more unfavorable?
Yeah, so it gets really tricky when you're completely plant-based if you're sensitive to legumes, because legumes are really our most concentrated protein sources, and they provide, the iron and zinc and all of those things. And if you, for whatever reason, need to exclude legumes, it makes it a little more challenging. What I would recommend is to start with soaking and soaking for a couple of days, soak, rinse, and cooking really well, and using a small amount so your gut microbiota adjust to the high fiber content of those foods, so that you can slowly adapt. Now, the other thing you can do is use some meat analogs, which are more processed, so they tend not to cause some of the gastrointestinal upsets, but also tofu and some of the fermented things like tempeh could be more easily digested for some people. Of course, seeds are also a surprisingly rich source of protein. So pumpkin seeds and other like sunflower seeds, but pumpkin seeds particularly are very high, and hemp seeds
are incredible.
Yeah, one of the very best. So incorporating more of those foods as well would be important for people that struggle with the legumes.
And then how about the discussion around soy? There is obviously some studies out there showing that soy can be quite harmful depending on what the soy product is. And I think it just depends on how it's actually grown as a first thing, whether it's an organic soy product or not, as well as, I guess, how it's been, like I said, how it's been made from there. So can you kind of touch on the soy realm a little bit for us?
Yeah, it's probably the food that there are more research studies on than any other food. There are literally thousands and thousands of studies on soy. It's unbelievable. And what we actually know about soy, to me, we've had several thousand years of testing for soy. If you look in Asia, they've used soy for thousands of years. But again, let's go back to the blue zones, because if soy was so problematic, it probably wouldn't be a staple in 2 out of 5 blue zones. We've got the Okinawan Japanese who average 2 servings of soy a day, the Seventh-day Adventists of Loma Linda who average about the same, a couple of servings of soy a day, and they are among the healthiest, longest-lived people on the planet. So to me, that's a bit of an acid test. Now, if we look at the research on soy, what we know is soy is a selective estrogen receptor modulator. So it's in short form, it's called a serum. And a selective estrogen receptor modulator is something that attaches to estrogen receptor sites in the body. And sometimes it serves as a weak estrogen, like it does in bones. Sometimes it serves as an anti-estrogen, like it does in breast tissue. So estrogen, the phytoestrogen in soy will actually attach to estrogen receptor sites in breast tissue, preventing the very powerful estradiol that increases our risk of tumor growth. It blocks that type of estrogen. And so what we know about soy is we know that, we have very, very good evidence that soy reduces risk of coronary artery disease. It reduces risk of a couple of types of cancer, one being breast cancer and the other being prostate cancer in men. And it reduces risk actually quite significantly. So for breast cancer, the risk is most profoundly reduced when soy is consumed as a child and an adolescent for females, that reduces lifetime risk of breast cancer very significantly. And in fact, we used to always, be cautious about using soy with breast cancer. Now we know, and we've known since probably about 2010, that it not only is soy not damaging for breast cancer patients, but it actually increases your chance of survival and reduces your risk of recurrence. Wow. Because of the way that it behaves in breast tissue. And so we know that. We know it can reduce hot flashes as it does in Japanese women. We've known that for a long time. It can protect kidney function. It can possibly slightly reduce risk of osteoporosis. I mean, there are many advantages. In terms of disadvantages, well, the biggest disadvantage, I would say, is it, like many foods, it can serve as a goitrogen, which means it can increase the risk of thyroid dysfunction if you're not getting enough iodine in your diet. If you're getting enough iodine, it's not a problem. It's like, cruciferous vegetables or flax seeds or peanuts, they're all goitrogens. And so, it's just not a huge issue if you don't have a congenital thyroid issue or something like that. The other concern about soy is some people are concerned that it may cause feminization of males. And we have just a truckload of studies saying that that's not true. It doesn't change anything about sperm counts or virility or anything like that. However, we have 2 cases of people that were consuming between 12 and 20 servings of soy a day who actually did have feminization. That's way too much of any food to be eating. They were living off everything with soy ice cream, soy milk, soy tofu, they were living on soy, and that's too much phytoestrogens for anyone. What would be a reasonable, safe amount for people is kind of what people in Asia would consume, 1 or 2 servings in children, maybe 2 or 3 servings in adults would be a reasonable amount of isoflavones to be consuming.
Yeah, and I think it's important to actually maybe talk about which soy products they're consuming, right? Because it's not necessarily that these the blue zone people are making these soy milks filled with additives or making soy sauce filled with gluten and things that other products that can be damaging, right?
Right. So and again, so we're wanting, when we're consuming soy, the preference is for first generation soy foods. Of course, you don't need to consume soy, but soy is one of those foods that gives you a lot more flexibility with your diet because of they, just useful in a number of culinary applications. So what you would want to be using is what we call first generation soy foods mainly. So that would be things like edamame, organic edamame. Tempeh, tofu, just soybeans, as a legume. Things like miso. These in the Japanese or the Okinawan diet, it was mainly tofu and miso that were the primary soy foods. In the Adventist, they use a lot of meat analogs, which is kind of surprising, but nonetheless, they still do very well despite that. But I would say if you're choosing to include soy foods in your diet, I would prefer organic soy foods because, for example, even if you're eating veggie meats, if they're not organic, the chemical that's used to extract the protein is sometimes they use hexane, which is a neurotoxin. Okay. And so if you have it organic, they're not allowed to use hexane. And any hexane residues would be not something that we would want to be really consuming. So I would say,
what can hexane do to the body?
Well, it's a neurotoxin, and a neurotoxin is something that can negatively affect the nervous system and the brain. Mm-hmm. And so it, chronic exposure is we don't know the long-term consequences, to be honest. We just know that it can damage the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
So whether or not it might increase risk of neurological disorders like Alzheimer's, I'm not sure. But certainly it's something to just be aware of, and it's another reason to choose organic.
That's exactly right. That's what I was about to say. Like, if you're going to do it right. Go for the organic. But it's interesting what you said about the iodine, and it makes sense as to why edamame beans taste so good with salt, and same with peanuts with salt. Like things like that, it's almost like added.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. And it's one of the things that people who are eating plant-based are often lacking, because most of our iodine comes from salt, iodized salt. But a lot of people who get really into health, they don't want to use iodized salt. They want to use pink Himalayan sea salt, or one of these sort of neat culinary salts, which don't have very much iodine.
No.
So the other big source for plant-based eaters are seaweeds, and a lot of people aren't that fussy about seaweeds, so they don't include them. And if you're eating a lot of goitrogens, as we tend to do when we eat a lot of plants, it's possible that you could fall short on iodine. So it's really important that you include a source. And it can even be a container of kelp powder that you just can sprinkle. All you need is about 1/16 of a teaspoon. It's just the tiniest amount to give you your 150 micrograms of iodine a day.
So what other things do you find commonly across the board that people are missing out on when they're doing this diet? Like, what supplements should people be taking, I guess, is the question I'm asking.
Yeah, so there's no question vitamin B12 is an issue.
Yeah.
So however, that having been said, vitamin B12 is an issue for everyone over the age of 50. So, and the reason is that in animal products, vitamin B12 is bound to protein.
Mm-hmm.
In order to cleave the B12 off of the protein it's bound to, you need a certain amount of stomach acid, and you need a certain amount of enzymes, the proteases, to get that B12 off of the protein. And so if you are low in stomach acid, if you're not good at producing enzymes, which happens as we age, our ability to get B12 from animal products diminishes very significantly. And it's estimated that 10 to 30% of seniors are not able to do that. And so in North America, the Institute of Medicine in North America, who develops all of our nutrition recommendations, they say nobody over 50 should rely on meat or any other animal products for B12. They should all be getting their B12 from fortified foods and supplements.
I guess there's a good reason as to why people should potentially try having apple cider vinegar or some sort of bitters every day, really, like introducing something like that to increase your gut bile.
Yeah, well, that's a thought, and I haven't seen a study that's actually looked at that and if it affects your ability to, extract B12 from animal sources. But for vegans, we see huge ranges of B12 levels in vegans around the world. So in North America, vegans tend to do well because we have so many B12 fortified foods. So all of our non-dairy milks are B12 fortified. Well, most of our non-dairy milks are meat analogs. A lot of our cereals are a lot of B12 fortified foods, nutritional yeast, and so on. And we know about B12, so a lot of us will take a supplement at least once or twice a week. And so we tend to do quite well, whereas in Europe, the level of B12 deficiency among vegans is higher because they have fewer fortified foods, and the B12 tends to be less on their radar, so we see higher rates of B12 deficiency there. I'm not sure how it is in Australia, but I think it's similar. I don't think you have quite as many fortified foods as we do in North America with B12.
No, but I was wondering if you, for instance, you're still having things like if you're sourcing nutritional yeast and stuff like that, like, does it matter where the source actually comes from, or will it still be providing quite a high level of B12?
Yeah, no, they're actually, if it's a fortified food, the B12 is quite easy to get. And in fact, if you take a supplement of, say, 1,000 micrograms of B12, you'll probably absorb less than 1% of it, maybe 0.5% of it. Whereas if you get it in a fortified food with a smaller amount, you absorb a much higher percentage.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I was actually just listening to a podcast about that and about the digestive tract only usually taking in about 20% if you've got a healthy gut. So if you have the option, you're better to do a drip or say, for instance, get a little IV bag if you can. Like, that's a great way to get your vitamins in. There's actually a company over in the States that are doing it. It's quite an interesting topic, but yeah. So I guess outside of B12, is there anything else that people should really be looking for?
Yeah, so the other nutrients that should be on the radar of everyone are, well, vitamin D is an issue because a lot of omnivores will get vitamin D from fish and from eggs and from fortified margarine or whatever, whereas vegans, there are fewer fortified products with vitamin D. So, I mean, obviously, ideally we want to get our vitamin D from sunshine, and in Australia, not as much of an issue as it is here in Canada.
But we still have vitamin D deficient people. That's crazy. Yeah. We're so sun-safe.
Yeah, for sure. So it's something that also we need to make sure we have a reasonable source. And then the other nutrients that can be of concern are things like...
Before we move on, do you mean D3 in particular? Like, are you getting people to take D3 supplement, or does it really matter, just a D supplement in general?
Well, the research on vitamin D suggests that if it's taken in small volumes, so 1,000 IUs to maybe 4,000 IUs, that there's not a lot of difference between D2 and D3. They're both quite effective in although I know some people who swear that D3 is more effective. But if you're doing a large bolus, D3 is definitely more effective. So, but the one thing to know is that you can get vegan D3. So it's extracted from lichen. So there are many vitamin D3 supplements that are vegan.
That's interesting. Okay, excellent. So, sorry, moving on from there, other nutrients that people might be lacking.
Yeah, so the other ones that come up are essential fatty acids, especially what we think of as the fish fats, DHA and EPA.
Yeah.
And DHA and EPA are, so people understand, the omega-3 fatty acid family is really a variety of omega-3 fatty acids that just differ in the length of their carbon chains. And so the smallest one is called the parent fatty acid, and it's called alpha-linolenic acid, and it comes from plants like chia seeds and hemp seeds and flax seeds and walnuts, from leafy green vegetables. There's some as well. And so that's the plant omega-3. It's less biologically active in the body than the longer, bigger omega-3s, like EPA or eicosapentaenoic acid and DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. And these are what we often think of as fish fats. And that's the kind of omega-3s in fish. And so a lot of people think because those omega-3s are more biologically active, we need to eat them directly. And that it may be true for some people, not necessarily for everyone. So if we eat alpha-linolenic acid, our bodies can convert it to EPA and DHA to some extent. It's a much more efficient conversion in young women than it is in young men, because young women will have to be ready to grow a baby, and babies need a lot of those essential fatty acids, so we naturally convert more efficiently. But as we get older, our ability to convert tends to diminish, and a lot of things that you do, if your diet is unhealthy, if you eat too much omega-6 fatty acids, there are a variety, if you drink too much alcohol, if you eat trans fatty acids, all of these things can inhibit conversion. And so we need to have a good diet to ensure sufficient conversion. But apart from that, what's very interesting and what a lot of people don't realize is that fish don't make EPA and DHA. It actually comes from plants in the ocean. So it's made by something called microalgae. And microalgae, these tiny little plants, are what supply the fish with DHA and EPA. So what we can do as people eating plant-based who don't eat fish and what we are doing is culturing the microalgae. So we can grow it in a safe environment where there's no mercury or dioxins or any of the industrial pollutants we worry about in fish. We can culture that, put it in supplement form or put it in foods even and consume it in that way. And so certainly there are a number of companies that are doing that. It's very easy to get vegan EPA and DHA. So that's another way that we can boost our omega-3 by taking the supplements of DHA and EPA.
Do you know if there's been a study done around the I guess the absorption rate between the two different types, between fish oil compared to your algae oil, and which one is better for absorption at all?
Yeah, I actually don't think there's much of a difference from the studies I've seen, so it seems like they're reasonably comparable that way.
Okay, yeah, I just thought like maybe it could be a good way just for people to get some extra DHA, EPA in, just to like, yeah, it could be a good little setup, but if it doesn't matter. But yeah, that's really cool. So how about for you? Do you have any sort of anecdotal stories of people having really good experiences? And then I'd also like to flip it and have the opposite, if you do have any experiences where people have kind of done it and it just hasn't worked for them as well.
Yeah, so definitely in terms of, I have all kinds of stories of people that it's worked well for, but I think my favorite story is about a young man who came to a lecture I did in Santa Rosa, California. And when I finished my lecture, he came up to me and he said a number of things, but what was important is he said, I have cancer. I'm 36 years old and I'm really scared. And I always was a big meat eater. And my favorite pastime was eating at the best restaurant in town, in whatever city I was in, and ordering the most expensive bottle of wine and the biggest steak on the menu. And that was what I did for fun. And he said, and now I've been searching to see if I could do something in my lifestyle to give me a better chance of survival. And so he said, can you help me? And I said, of course, I'll do whatever I can to help you. And I started working with him. And his cancer went into remission. But that's not the story here. The story here, that's just part of the story. The real story here is what happened to his father. So his whole family, his mom, his dad, his brother, his wife, everybody in the family said, whatever diet you're doing, we're doing with you. Because we always want to be able to eat as a family. So his father had been a diabetic for 20 years. He had just every kind of health issue that you can imagine. He had peripheral artery disease. He had just had a major heart attack. He was going into kidney failure. He had severe hypertension. He had cataracts. He had chronic gout 6 or 7 times a year. Just everything you can imagine. And he was told by his doctors he probably had about 2 years to live. He was on 17 medications a day and 40 units of insulin. And he was told that all of these diseases were progressive and irreversible, that there was nothing he could do to save his life. And he went on this diet. Within a year of going on this diet, he was off every medication and he was off all his insulin.
That's unreal.
And so not only that, but his numbers on no medications, his blood pressure was 115/70, his A1C was 5.1, his fasting sugar was, it was 80 milligrams per deciliter, which is about 4.5 or something, and millimoles per liter. It was just everything normalized. Even his kidney function returned to normal. And this man went into his physician, and his doctor, he said to his doctor, why didn't you tell me that this was possible? I mean, he said, I'm healthy. They did the PET scan on his heart, and he went from in 2005 having very severe heart disease and a reduced ejection fraction and just terrible ischemia, all of that stuff, to in 2017 having perfectly normal cardiac function. The heart disease is gone, and the diabetes is gone, and the kidney failure is gone, and he completely reversed every disease. And he said, when he asked his doctor, why didn't you tell me? The doctor said, I didn't tell you because I didn't know. I wouldn't have believed this if I wouldn't have seen it with
his own eyes, yeah.
he said, we don't learn this stuff in medical
No,
school.
exactly. They get maybe a semester on nutrition. It's like a small little fraction. I actually think I heard the story of a doctor getting 3 hours of nutrition study, and that's about it throughout their whole 6 years.
Yeah, exactly. That's so common.
Really crazy considering it's the major fuel for the body.
Yeah,
exactly. So with that, was it just straight vegan diet? Was there any fasting involved? Was there any juicing involved? Or was it just literally eat plentiful in whole vegan foods?
Yeah, no. So the diet was hardcore.
Okay, yeah.
So for Andreas, who had cancer, we were probably at 90% raw.
Mm-hmm.
This was a high raw diet, especially initially.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of sprouts, lots of a green juice was the start of every day, and the green juice was mainly leafy greens, cucumber, celery, lots of sprouts. They did their own homemade sprouts, and then they would have fresh turmeric root, fresh ginger root, a squeeze of lime or lemon, just absolutely loaded. And the reason we would start the day with that on an empty stomach is you're removing the plant cell walls, making the antioxidants and phytochemicals in that beverage super absorbable. Just fighting the cancer. And so a lot of cruciferous vegetables. And so that's how we would start the day. And the whole day was very high raw. Now with his dad, we moderated that a little bit. So it was a little less raw, but still hardcore. So for example, we went fairly low on the very high starch foods like potatoes and rice, and more focused on the beans and greens and vegetables. Mm-hmm. Nuts and seeds were included, but a very, very clean diet. Everything was organic, especially with the person who had cancer. We just went completely organic for him, and it was just as clean of a diet. And what I tell people is the goal is everything you eat is either feeding or fighting disease. You want every single calorie that crosses your lips to be fighting disease. Mm. And so every single cell of the human body is a product of what you put in your mouth. And if you expect to reverse a serious disease like that, boy, you need to be paying attention to what's going in your mouth. Mm-hmm. And it's clean, organic, and very nutrient dense. So a lot of nutrients per calorie. So a lot of focus on green vegetables and vegetables in general. All the colors of the rainbow, at least one giant salad every day. And on that giant salad, like I say, every color of the rainbow, sprouts, and then we want something to fill you up. So it could be, if they're doing sprouted, it could be sprouted quinoa or bloomed wild rice or something like that. Or it could be steamed sweet potatoes or steamed squash. And then your protein, we would definitely include seeds and possibly some legumes there as well. And so just a really clean diet. And then
now with that, like I guess on the flooding of nutrients, would you ever recommend that vegans take a greens powder as well? Like just to boost it up, even if they're getting a whole heap of vegetables in each day and getting a lot of nutrients in? Is it worthwhile doing something like this?
I'm sorry, I missed
a greens powder.
A green
powder, like it's pretty much a concentrate of micronutrients, so it's an extra.
It's like the dehydrated greens.
Yeah.
Yes. I certainly don't. I don't think they're absolutely necessary if you're having, your green juice and you're having your giant salad and you're having your greens with your dinner meal. I don't think they're necessary, but I don't think they would hurt either.
No, it's like why not flood the body with nutrients?
Yeah, for people that aren't eating that way, they don't get their greens 3 times a day and they're not getting in a volume of greens, then I think they can make very good sense to have. They're just expensive for some people.
Yeah, okay. And so on the other side of this, the flip side, have you ever seen this not work for anybody? Or more so, it probably come down to people not doing it, not following it correctly, I'd say. But yeah.
Exactly. So I've had all kinds of people who say, I feel weak, I feel lethargic, my stomach's sore, all of those things. I have had very rarely a person that we can't adjust the diet enough to make it work for.
Mm-hmm.
On occasion, there are people who it won't work for because they have some sort of metabolic syndrome. Yeah. Where they can't handle legumes, or they have allergies where they can't eat nuts, seeds, or legumes. And in those cases, it becomes very challenging. But most of the people I've dealt with that have struggled, for example, I had an 89-year-old man not long ago, and he was following a super low fat, no nuts, no seeds, no oils, none of that. That kind of whole food, no fat, plant-based diet. And he was feeling weak and losing too much weight. And so I told him that we're going to be adding in some healthy sources of fat. So nuts, seeds, nut and seed butters, avocados, those kinds of foods. And when we did, his health improved dramatically. And I would say his energy returned. He just felt so much better. But I would say that one of the main reasons for that is for different people, we need different amounts of fat to be able to absorb all of these fat-soluble nutrients, the phytochemicals, the antioxidants, and the vitamin D and vitamin E and all of those fat-soluble nutrients. And so if you go too low, for some individuals, they just wouldn't be able to absorb what they need. So boosting the fat really helped in that case. So there are lots of different scenarios depending on what type of diet the person has adopted. And for many young people, I know teenagers who become vegan, often what they do is instead of having a burger and fries, they have a double order of fries. You know, you can't ever hope to achieve optimal health doing that. No. And so really have to teach them. Most of us don't grow up eating lentils and tofu. So there, you know, when you suddenly eliminate meat, there's no substitute. They don't know what to do. Even a veggie meat would be better than a double order of fries.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I mean, there's a few different variations of the diet that you've talked about already today. Raw, low carb, low fat. One that you actually emailed me about was the macrobiotic. What is the macrobiotic before we go on, just for the listeners?
You know, I'm definitely not an expert in macrobiotic eating, but it's a diet that is very focused on brown rice as a staple with a lot of cooked vegetables. So it was used especially in the past as a sort of an anti-cancer diet. Okay. There's often seaweed, but it is mostly cooked. They don't eat a lot of raw foods, but what I would say about it, my biggest concerns about it is I think including raw foods is an important part of a healthy diet. But the other thing that I would say is that I don't think it's a necessarily good idea to make rice a dietary staple.
No, arsenic levels.
Yeah, for the arsenic levels, but also because it's not a terribly nutrient-dense food. And there are other more nutrient-dense grains than brown rice. Also, some types of brown rice have a very high glycemic index, even higher than the white rice counterpart, depending on. So, for example, from Australia, there's Calrose rice. Well, Calrose white rice has a lower GI than Calrose brown rice. So the white rice has a GI of a glycemic index of 83, and the brown rice is like 87. And white sugar has a glycemic index of 65. So it's even. So we need to just be our 68, somewhere in that neighborhood. So what I would say to people where grains are concerned, two things. One is, and I don't know how it is in Australia, but here, we tend to use something called Roundup, which is glyphosate, to dry our grains. So I would say stick to organic grains if that's an issue in your country, definitely. But even for other reasons, it's good to stick to organic. The other thing that I would say is be aware that even if you completely eliminate refined grains, so no white flour, no white rice, you're not using any of those refined grains, you're just using whole grains. All whole grains are not created equal. And in fact, there's a lot of processing of whole grains. So in my view, there's a hierarchy of whole grains. And at the top of the hierarchy is intact whole grains. Nothing bad added, nothing good removed. You're eating the plant as it's grown in nature. Yeah. And so I'm talking about things like kamut berries, spelt berries, quinoa, barley, rye berries. These are intact grains. And the best of the best would be sprouting them. Because you sprout a food, which means you soak and then you sprout. What happens is you're essentially telling the food, very simply, that it's time to grow a young baby plant. And to grow a baby plant, guess what happens? You reduce anti-nutrients, you liberate stored nutrients, and you multiply the army of phytochemicals that's naturally present to protect the plant. So broccoli, when you have little broccoli sprouts, the sulforaphane, for example, is 50 times what it is in mature broccoli. So sprouting a plant is very, very helpful. So at the top of this hierarchy, you've got the sprouted grains and then the cooked grains, and then you've got broken grains. So you've just cut them like steel cut oats. And then you've got rolled grains, and then you've got shredded grains, and then you've got ground grains, as in flour. Whole wheat flour, for example. And then you've got flaked grains, and then you've got puffed grains. And as you go down that hierarchy, what happens is you increase the glycemic index, you reduce nutrients, and you increase the rate of absorption into the bloodstream, and you're getting less bang for your buck, if you will.
Yeah, I really like that. That's great. That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, so you want to stick closer to the top of that whole grain hierarchy. Then even within that intact grains, the grains are so different. So rice is, to me, a less favorable grain than quinoa or some of the pseudo grains. So quinoa, buckwheat, wild rice that are not true grains tend to have a little more micronutrients and more protein. So these are really favorable. And then the other grains, including some gluten-containing grains, can be very valuable if you're not sensitive to gluten, like spelt and kamut, to sprout them and to include them in a salad or in a breakfast bowl. These are, 13 grams of protein per cup in kamut, for example. A lot of nutrients and a ton of fiber. So they can be a healthy part of the diet. But just be cautious of, whole wheat bread does not equal kamut berry salad.
No, exactly. And when it comes to sprouting, what are the basic guidelines around sprouting? Is there anything you shouldn't try sprouting, and how long should you sprout for?
Well, you need to make sure that the food you're sprouting is a living food, so it's not been treated with heat or it won't sprout at all. So there's some things that won't sprout. So grains, you can definitely sprout almost all grains unless, like I say, they've been heat treated. Oat groats are often heat treated so they wouldn't sprout, but they can be soaked and you still get benefits from soaking. So with sprouting, you usually soak for a day and then sprout grains until there's a very small, as maybe half a centimeter or so of a sprout. And because if you grow it long and it becomes like a grass, then it tastes grassy. Yeah. It's great to use. You can use it in juicing or something, but it's not as palatable. But other foods like legumes need to be sprouted for several days. So you would do 3 to 5 days for legumes. But the big beans, you never eat raw, even sprouted, because the lectins are still there to some extent. You must cook large legumes. The only legumes that I would sprout are mung beans and lentils. You could do maybe, even, any other beans really should be cooked after they're sprouted. Even chickpeas. A lot of people make sprouted chickpea hummus. There are trypsin inhibitors there in the large legumes. And so you need to be a little cautious about how much of that you eat on a daily basis.
Now, something that we actually didn't get to dive into it before. We talked about proteins, we talked about omega-3s. One thing that we come up a lot against is calcium. Where are people getting their calcium from on a plant-based or vegan diet?
Well, calcium, of course, we are raised to believe that the only source of calcium is cow's milk, you know?
Yeah.
And in fact, cow's milk has a lot of calcium. It's meant to grow this little tiny calf into a great big cow in fairly short order. And so it's got about 300 milligrams per cup. Moose milk has about 600 milligrams per cup. It doesn't make it essential food.
No.
You know, just because something has a lot of calcium, all mammals' milk has a lot of calcium. Calcium is important for growing bones, and so we all need it. So human milk, all milk has a fair bit of calcium, but it doesn't make it essential. And if you look at Paleolithic calcium intakes, they were estimated to be between 1,000 and 2,000 milligrams a day without a single drop of milk from any other mammal. And so where did that calcium come from? Well, it came from a variety of sources, but mostly green vegetables, green leaves in the woods. And so we can get calcium from, one of about vegan diet versus other diets is that almost everything we eat has calcium. Meat is not a good source of calcium, but beans are. Yeah. So you can get 100 to 150 milligrams of calcium in different types of a cup of cooked legumes. So you get it from almost everything you eat. Tofu, in where I buy my tofu, some of my tofu has between 350 and 600 milligrams of calcium per serving. Now, fortified non-dairy milks have the same amount of calcium in our country as cow's milk. So you get 300 milligrams from a cup of fortified milk. But everything, even some fruits have calcium, like oranges and figs. Some seeds and nuts like almonds and tahini even chia seeds are really rich in calcium. And so almost every category of food gives you enough calcium. And I got to tell you a story here because I've been vegan for almost, for 30 years, basically. And so when I was turned about maybe 48 or something like that, maybe about 12 years ago, my doctor said, we should really test your bone density because you're a slim white female. You have a strong history of osteoporosis. My mom had osteoporosis in her 50s, and you haven't eaten dairy for 20 years at that point. And so I said, well, sure, and I had it done. And when I went to get my results from the doctor's office, he opened my chart and his jaw dropped. He said, your bone density is so high, we couldn't put it on the chart. They actually had to put an arrow above the chart. It was 2 to 2.5 standard deviations above norm for my age. So if you look at osteopenia, or an osteoporosis, you're looking at that level below, the reference. Well, I was that number above the reference, the standard deviations above what was expected for my age. And the doctor just looked at me and he said, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever you're doing, keep doing it because your bones are made of steel. And I can tell you what I do. I make sure I get 1,000 milligrams of calcium a day in my diet. So I eat a mixture of healthy foods that provide a lot of calcium, but I also exercise, and I exercise pretty much every day unless I'm traveling. But even if I'm traveling at the airport, I never take an escalator. I use the stairs. I walk as much as I can in the course of the day while I'm traveling. But on other days, I get a decent amount of weight-bearing exercise. And I think that's what's really important, to give your bones the signal to stay strong, and that means physical fitness.
Yeah. So how about when you are traveling? What are like the go-to foods that you get when you're out and about, or the things that you take with you to make sure you've always got a snack or food option available?
Yeah, so it gets tricky when you're traveling internationally because a lot of times you're not allowed to bring food in. But I always bring trail mix. So a mix of nuts, seeds, and some dried fruits, most of which I dry myself in the summertime, and cherries and pears and things like that. So I always have some trail mix with me. Now, the other thing, if I'm able, is I bring a salad. If, a full meal salad, if I can, and some fruit. And so those are kind of staples for me. But if I'm in an airport and I can't bring food into the country, I seek out, and it's not optimal for sure, but I seek out a little tray of veggies and hummus. Mm-hmm. And the hummus is super high in salt, but it gives me some protein and some calories. And so that'll be a decent a little thing. But I'm finding more and more there'll be an Asian or a Mexican outlet at the airport where I can go and get rice and black beans and a big green salad, or I can get a stir fry with tofu and some brown rice, and so those will be, probably the most decent options. And quite often you can find a salad bar, and if I find a salad bar, well, I'm happy as can be. So that's, those are kind of my goals. And I always make sure I order a vegan meal on a plane. And usually they're terrible meals, but at least you get some fresh fruit instead of junky dessert. Usually you'll get a little bit of grapes or some dessert fruit, and usually you get a small salad and I quite often order the Asian version, so I'll get lentils and rice and some cooked cauliflower or whatever. So it'll be something halfway decent. But I'm not so, I'm anal, but I'm not so anal that I won't eat a meal on a plane when I'm traveling for 14 hours.
Yeah.
I think you have to be reasonable and be flexible. So it's not always going to be optimal nutrition. You do the best you can with what is available.
Yeah, exactly right. And do you ever find that people kind of overdo the fruit because they're not sure what else to have?
It's so interesting. Have you ever watched any of the videos on nutritionfacts.org?
No, I haven't. I'll have to check that out.
This is one of the best resources on the internet. It's called Nutrition Facts, FACTS.org. And it's done by a guy that wrote a book called How Not to Die, Dr. Michael Greger. And it is, he has these 2 to 7 minute videos on every topic you can think of, where he just shares the findings of the literature. And his latest video was on how much fruit we can eat and it be okay, and all of the research that's been done. And his conclusion was, it's almost like you could eat as much as you want of fruit.
Yeah.
That it's not a terrible thing. Now, what I would say is I think it's important to balance, because fruit's very low in protein. You want to balance it with other foods, with your legumes and vegetables and so on. But I myself am a bit of a fruitaholic in the summertime. When the blueberries are in season, I could eat like 3 pounds of blueberries in a day quite happily. So it's just, I think that we can, eat a fair bit of fruit. I tend to eat, I definitely eat more fruit in the summertime. In the wintertime, it diminishes significantly. And I end up relying more on citrus fruits. And I think for the average person, I wouldn't worry so much about how much. I would worry about making sure I get 2 or 3 servings a day, because I think they're so valuable for potassium and vitamin C and other nutrients that they just are, and they're wonderful. I tend to be quite anti-sugar.
Yeah.
I don't like to use sugar in my food preparation. And so for me, I get sweet from fruit. And so if I want concentrated sweetener I'm making a cookie or a cake or something like that, I use dried fruits, and that's it. And I use as few as possible. So my things aren't overly sweet. I don't even like things that are overly sweet. I can't stand it. I don't like any sweetness in my non-dairy beverages. I like unsweetened only. I don't like, I buy these green juices. One time I went to the airport and I bought a green juice because I was desperate for something to eat. And I took 1 sip and I threw it out. It was just disgustingly sweet. I couldn't drink it. It was like they'd used concentrated apple juice or something in it. It was horrible. And so you can train your palate to enjoy things that are less sweet. And so for me, fruit is such a treat. And I love using fruit to make ice cream as well, like the frozen banana mango ice cream, and that ends up being a beautiful treat, especially in the summertime.
Yeah.
So
there's a few things
yeah.
on that. Like I actually did that for Christmas one year. We did mango and banana and coconut milk, and it was a great little like ice cream to have. But the juices are quite an interesting thing because when you go to a juice bar, usually they'll pack it full of fruit because people won't like the green juice unless it's very quite sweet. But there was a campaign here in Australia for quite a while where they said every day you need to get in your five vegetables and 2 fruits, and it made people scared of going above 2 fruits a day. And so it's quite interesting when we give people a meal plan, they'll be like, "Oh, hold up, this day you've got me having more than like 2 serves of fruit. Is this all right?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course it's all right. Like it's fine because you're getting rid of a lot of the other shit in your diet that can actually cause the grief, and the fruit is not going to be the big issue that's going to cause any dramas at all." So it is quite interesting.
I couldn't agree with you more, Maddie, because I agree. I don't think it's a good idea to be drinking a lot of fruit juices. No. And so when I make a green smoothie, if I put anything in for sweetness, it might be a carrot. And if I put in apple, it depends on the person, but I would put in a quarter of an apple. I would just, I just wouldn't make it sweet at all. Generally,
I don't bite off of it, right?
Yeah, and in smoothies, I think we need to be cautious there. You don't want to make them overly sweet because when you blend fruit or when you extract the juice, it means you're absorbing very, very rapidly the fructose there. And so I think it's better to eat fruit in the intact form, generally. Once in a while, I love... I've just come from a long run, and I almost crave a juice, and so I'll sometimes squeeze a couple of oranges or a grapefruit and an orange, and I'll just squeak that back, and it just feels so good. That's the only way I would ever drink fruit juices is freshly.
You're squeezing it, yeah.
A lot of the fiber, I don't remove any of the fiber from it at all. The pulp goes in there, and that's it. Yeah.
Well, that's incredible. I've really enjoyed our chat, Brenda. This has been really very insightful. Like for myself, I'm not vegan, but we do help out a lot of vegans. We do work with a lot of plant-based people, so it's good to actually get a little bit more insight. For someone who might be looking to turn to become a vegan, they're interested in dabbling in it, they want to try it out and see if it's for them. Where are your best resources that they can find?
Well, I would definitely recommend one of the Becoming Vegan books. So either Becoming Vegan Comprehensive, which is about 600 pages, a ton of references, or we've got an express version of that, which is about half the size, no references. It just gives you the information if you want a quicker read. But every question you could possibly think of about vegan diets would be answered in those books. We cover every nutrient you can think of, every stage of the life cycle, athletes, underweight, overweight, eating disorders, the works. So those are really good resources. And then the other resource that two other resources I would strongly recommend. One is a website called veganhealth.org. And it is a very accurate and very in-depth information on vegan nutrition by Jack Norris. And then the other one is the one that I mentioned by Dr. Michael Greger, just exceptional information and his books. And then, of course, Dr. Furman's information as well is just exceptional.
Okay, that's unreal. It's a really good starting point. And for you, do you actually do like Skype consults or anything like that? If someone wanted to come to you from Australia, is that something that you do?
Yeah, no, I very rarely do consults because I have so many book deadlines and so many speaking engagements at the moment that I've actually had to cut way back on my consults. I actually just did a lady from Malaysia yesterday who was a doctor who was struggling with diabetes and just really wanting to have a phone consult. So we did that. But I'm very selective because I just don't have time. I'm going to be gone for a month in the next little while.
Yeah, well, I think a good outline of that is we contacted you in July, I think it was, and you booked for November. It was like your first available date for a podcast, which is unreal. So thank you for fitting us in firstly, but it just kind of gives an example of what your diary might look like.
My diet?
Oh, no, sorry, what your diary looks like. But that's a great question. What is a typical day of food for you?
Oh, okay. Well, my diet is I start the day. Occasionally I'll have a green juice, but normally my morning is a breakfast bowl. And my breakfast bowl is fruit, like usually berries, and maybe in winter it's apples and bananas, in the summer it's peaches and whatever. But fruit, grains, and it's usually kamut berries that are sprouted or cooked or both, or quinoa or whatever kind of grains I have on hand. Sometimes barley, sometimes whatever. And then I have some sort of creamy thing in it. It could be cashew, pear cream, or it could be a unsweetened yogurt that I have a cashew almond yogurt. And then on top, I have all the seeds and Brazil nuts mixed together. So I like to get the selenium in the Brazil nuts. So chia seeds, hemp seeds, flax seeds, all of the seeds mixed together. And then I make a dehydrated, unsweetened granola. I love a little crunch. So that goes on top. So this is like a major, but it's a big bowl. Yeah. And I use some sort of non-dairy milk with that too. And I love it. That's my, go-to breakfast. I don't eat between meals, or very seldom eat between meals. My lunch will usually be a giant salad. So one of my other two meals will be a giant salad. So for lunch today, I had a huge kale salad with watermelon radish, with purple carrots, red peppers, sort of all the colors, broccoli sprouts. And then I had red quinoa with it, and some baked tofu that I baked in the oven. And so my dressing was a tahini lime dressing. And and seeds. I put pumpkin and sunflower seeds on my salad as well. So it was a big giant salad. And then dinner. Incredible. Yeah, it's great. That's my standard lunch. And then sometimes if I still want something, I'll have a piece of fruit. Or I'll have, today I actually had a cookie, and my cookie was it's a raw carrot, carrot ginger kind of cookie with, it's a very healthy cookie. And then dinner will be, in the winter time, often a cooked meal because it's so cold here. And so, what we've been doing the last few days is I love these, some people call them Buddha bowls. Start with some sweet potatoes or some quinoa or something like that, and then a whole bunch of steamed vegetables. And I do every kind of vegetable you can think of. I love Brussels sprouts and all of those things. And then I do either beans or chickpeas or tofu or tempeh on top. And then I made a peanut sauce. So a kind of a spicy peanut sauce. And then I just put the sprouts on top. And so that would be a very typical dinner. And then dessert. Well, last night it was a fruit bowl with a little bit of pear cashew cream. Mm-hmm. And often in the summertime, I make these chocolate-covered bananas that are rolled nuts, and they're frozen. Oh, they're so good.
So it'd be like a carob rather than straight chocolate?
I use chocolate. I just use a dark vegan chocolate.
Yeah, okay, excellent.
And you just melt it. You freeze your bar with a stick in it, your banana. And then when it's frozen, then you take and you brush the chocolate on really fast and roll it in nuts. And it's a really nice treat.
Yeah, I bet it would be. One last question before I let you go. Do you find that is there a cooking type that is not favorable? So, for instance, boiling vegetables is not a great way to cook your vegetables because you tend to lose the nutrients of the vegetable unless you are going to drink the water straight afterwards. Is there a typical cooking type that you say, hey, in regards to vegan foods, we should keep away from that?
Yeah, so this is an excellent question, and not just in regards to vegan foods, all foods. So when you think about cooking, when you cook foods, you produce products of oxidation that can be harmful to human health. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you cook meat, especially grilling it or cooking it with dry heat under a broiler or frying it, you produce something called heterocyclic amines, and heterocyclic amines are known carcinogens. And so you can't produce heterocyclic amines in plants because you need creatine or creatinine to produce heterocyclic amines, and they're not present in plant foods. So for meat eaters, heterocyclic amines, so dry heat is not as favorable as moist heat for cooking meat, because you'll produce less of those. Then there's something called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that is produced when you cook with dry heat any foods, especially if the food is blackened. So if you're grilling or frying or toasting something, the darker you make it, the more polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons you produce. And again, these are compounds that are potential carcinogens and have been linked to cancer. And then there are other things like acrylamide, which is a big concern for people that love potato products, because any food that's rich in asparagine, which is an amino acid, which potatoes are, that they're quite rich in asparagine. When you cook them in dry heat at high temperatures, they produce a lot of acrylamide. And so acrylamide is a potential carcinogen as well. And then the last thing that I'll mention, although there are others like aldehydes and things with cooking oils and stuff, but the last one I'll mention is advanced glycation end products. And so advanced glycation end products are the final stage of browning with the Maillard reaction. So the greater the browning, the greater the flavor, but the greater the advanced glycation end. And these advanced glycation end products are kind of irreversible. Sort of the proteins get kind of messed up and less digestible and all of these things, but advanced glycation end products are associated with advanced or accelerated aging, with some of the brain disorders like Alzheimer's, and even with diabetes and the complications of diabetes. And so advanced glycation end products, the richest source, the highest amounts, are found in grilled frankfurters, so grilled wieners. Grilled any grilled processed meat.
Well, hopefully it's something that people are keeping away from anyway, right?
but even any grilled meat, even grilled tofu will have some.
Well, that's super insightful.
So just the last word is that generally it's all dry heat. It's dry heat, high temperatures. With oil or without oil, just dry heat. So the safest methods of cooking are steaming, making stews, are moist heating methods. So that's just and it doesn't mean you can never barbecue or you can never dry heat, but you just want to be conscious not to use these super high temperatures and to cook as little as possible. To you want the food cooked, but you don't want to overcook and blacken the food.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Brenda. Is the best place for people to find you on your website, brendadavisrd.com?
Yes, that's correct.
And how about any social media followings? Do you have Facebook, Instagram, anything along those lines?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. I'm pathetic when it comes to social media. I just recently learned about this Instagram thing. I didn't grow up with it.
No,
so
exactly.
It's all to me, and my kids are just shocked at how little I'm able to do. But I'm slowly learning, and I hope to get on to these things a little bit more, but definitely Facebook, I'm there.
Unreal. Well, really, you're putting your time and efforts into something else that's probably a bit more meaningful than social media. So I can't fault you for that.
Thanks so much, Maddie. I really appreciate being on your program.
You're more than welcome, Brenda. Thank you so much. And for the listeners, make sure you head across to brendadavisrd.com to check her out and grab one of her books. Thank you so much, Brenda.
Oh, thanks, Maddie. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. I'll just quickly finish this recording.
Great.